This happened to me about a year ago, and I still can't shake the memory. I was waiting for the last train at a nearly deserted station late at night. The platform was quiet, too quiet, except for the occasional flicker of the overhead lights. There was an old woman sitting at the far end of the bench, wrapped in an oversized coat. She wasn't looking at me. Her head was tilted down as if she were staring at something in her lap. I tried to ignore her, but something about her made my skin crawl. Her stillness wasn't normal, and her presence felt heavy, almost suffocating. Eventually, I glanced over, and she looked up at me. Her face was pale, her eyes wide and unblinking, as though she had just seen something horrible. She smiled faintly and motioned for me to come closer. I hesitated. Everything in me was screaming not to go, but I didn't want to be rude. So, I moved a few steps closer, keeping my distance. That's when she said it. "Don't take the train tonight." Her voice was calm, steady, like she'd said those words 100 times before. "Why?" I asked, trying to sound braver than I felt. She leaned forward, her bony fingers gripping the edge of the bench. "Because he's here," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "He watches. He waits." "Who?" I stammered, but she didn't answer. She just stood up abruptly and shuffled away, disappearing into the shadows. I laughed nervously to myself, telling myself she was just crazy. But when the train arrived, something felt wrong. I got on anyway. The car was empty except for one man sitting at the far end. He was dressed in a dark hoodie, his face hidden, but I could feel him watching me. The train started moving, and I tried to focus on my phone, but then I noticed something strange. He wasn't sitting anymore. He was standing, holding on to the pole, inching closer to me. My chest tightened as I gripped my bag. "Can I help you?" I asked, my voice shaking. He didn't respond. He just smiled, this sick, twisted grin, and sat down directly across from me. I could see his hands now, twitching, like he was holding back some terrible urge. The train slowed as we approached the next stop. I bolted for the doors the moment they opened, running as fast as I could toward the exit. But just before I turned the corner, I glanced back. He was standing on the platform, watching me, that same smile on his face. And then I saw something that made my stomach drop. In his hand, he was holding my wallet. I don't know how he got it, and I don't want to know. All I know is that I never saw him again. But sometimes, when I'm alone at a station late at night, I feel like he's still watching. This one still gives me nightmares. I was coming back from a late shift, exhausted and just wanting to get home. The train station was nearly empty except for one woman sitting on the bench, clutching a large black bag. She wasn't moving, just staring down at her lap, her shoulders tense. First, I didn't pay her much attention. But as I waited, I noticed she wasn't blinking. Not once. Her eyes were locked on the bag, and her fingers were gripping the handles so tightly her knuckles were white. I looked away, pretending to scroll through my phone, but then she spoke. Her voice was soft, almost childlike. "Do you want to see what's inside?" The question caught me off guard. "What?" I said, turning to face her. She looked up at me then, her eyes wide and bloodshot. Her lips curled into a faint, eerie smile. "It's something special. I think you'll like it." I shook my head. "No thanks," I muttered, stepping away. But she didn't stop. She stood up, the bag dangling from her hand, and walked toward me. "You should look," she said, her voice sharper now, more urgent. "You'll never forget it." My heart was racing. I backed away, nearly stumbling off the platform. She stopped just a few feet from me, crouched down, and placed the bag on the ground. "Go ahead," she said, her smile widening. "Open it." I didn't move. The train pulled in just then, and I jumped on without looking back. As the doors closed, I saw her standing there, still smiling, the bag at her feet. When I got home, I couldn't stop thinking about her. What was in that bag? Curiosity got the better of me, and the next day, I searched the news. That's when I saw it. A woman matching her description had been arrested at the same station. Inside her bag, they found knives, rope, and something far worse. Polaroid photos of people sitting at the same bench. My bench. I don't want to know if my picture was in there. I've never gone back to that station since. I was running late for the last train home. The platform was mostly empty, except for a man standing near the edge, his back to me. He was tall, wearing a long coat, and he was holding something in his hand, what looked like a folded newspaper. I sat down on the bench, trying to catch my breath. But then I noticed something strange. He wasn't moving, not an inch. He just stood there, staring down at the tracks. The train arrived and I got on. So did he, sitting 2 rows behind me. I tried not to think about him, but something felt wrong. His presence was heavy, suffocating, like he was waiting for something to happen. At the next stop, the train emptied out. It was just the 2 of us now. I thought about getting off, but my stop was the next one, and I told myself I was being paranoid. That's when I heard it. A faint rustling sound, like paper crumpling. I turned around, and he was standing now, holding the newspaper in one hand. But it wasn't a newspaper. It was a folded-up jacket. And from the folds, something metallic glinted in the dim light. My heart pounded as I stood up, gripping the pole for balance. "Can I help you?" I asked, my voice shaking. He smiled. A slow, deliberate smile, and said, "You dropped something." "What?" I stammered. He held up my keys. My keys, which had been in my bag the entire time. "You should be more careful," he said. The train stopped, and I bolted out the doors, running as fast as I could toward the exit. But just before I reached the stairs, I heard his voice behind me, calm and steady. "See you next time." I don't know how he got my keys, and I don't want to know. All I know is, I've never felt safe on a train again.